Senate and in your campaign, but I want to begin by talking about you. You ran for the Senate a couple of times in the 1970s. At one point, you got 2 and then 4% of the vote in Vermont.
You forgot the election that I got 1%.
But you kept coming back. Why?
I'm not the brightest guy in the world, and I couldn't quite figure it out. But here's what it was. In those days, way back in the early 1970s, essentially what we were running were educational campaigns. And frankly, I enjoyed them very much. But when I ran for the first time in a special election in 1971, I got 2% of the vote. Came back, I got 1%. Then I got 4%, then I got 6% of the vote. But I've always enjoyed the opportunity of getting out, talking to people, going to meetings, and just talking about the most important issues facing working people. And then what happened, in 1981, somebody suggested to me, I think you got a shot to maybe, if you run as an independent, to become mayor of the city of Burlington, which is our largest city. We put together this incredible coalition of women's groups and neighborhood activists, neighborhood organizations, and environmentalists, and unions, and the Burlington Patrolmen's Association. The police officers came on board. It was an incredible coalition. And we ended up winning by 14 votes, and then the recount took place, and I won by 10 votes, and we were off and running.
And then you ran for the House. You lost, and then came back and won
Here's
again.
the point, and it's an interesting point. I ran for the House in '86 in a three-way race, got 14% of the vote, and we were heavily outspent, didn't have a whole lot of money. But it showed me and the people of Vermont that there was significant support for that message. 2 years later, I ran for the House, U.S. House, and I got the Republican won in a three-way race. The Republican won with 34%. I got 31%. Democrat got 19%. 2 years later, I won by 16 points. So I guess what you can say about me is I am a fairly persistent type guy, and we keep going forward.
Your legacy in Burlington, Vermont is mayor. What is it?
I think most people will tell you we essentially transformed that city into making it what is now regarded as one of the most livable, exciting small cities in the United States of America. It's extraordinary. You go to downtown Burlington on any evening in the summertime, literally thousands of people are downtown. We have a beautiful waterfront now, public park on the waterfront. We have a bike path that runs 9 miles. We paid attention to the young people. We led the nation in coming up with a housing trust fund for perpetually affordable housing. We had a very positive relationship with the workers in the city and the unions. We developed neighborhood planning assemblies by which people could have input into decisions affecting the city. And I'll tell you something that I'm extremely proud of. When I ran, at that point we had 2-year elections. When I won in 1983, we came close to doubling the voter turnout. How's that? From 81 to 83, we almost doubled the voter turnout because a lot of the working class people in the city, we didn't know this. Government can actually work for us rather than just for the big business interests. And Bernie is standing up for us. We're going to stand up with him. And I won the working class areas of the city 2-1, 3-1. And that's kind of the way we do politics.
Anyone who listens to you knows that you're not a native of Vermont. So how did a Brooklyn, New York resident end up there?
19, my wife and I, we had a little bit of money. My dad had passed away, left a few $1,000s. And in those days, you could buy land in Vermont for what seems to be an almost ridiculously low amount of money. In those days, it wasn't so low. So we bought some land in Middlesex, Vermont, and we came up there for a number of summers. A few years later, we made it our permanent residence.
Your dad was a painter?
No, he was a paint salesman. I was born in Brooklyn, New York. My dad came from Poland at the age of 17 without any money at all. And I often think back how incredibly brave it was. 17-year-old kid, couldn't speak a word of English, came to this country with no money at all. And he never made much money in his life. He was a paint salesman. We were solidly lower middle class. We lived in what was then a rent-controlled, small rent-controlled apartment. And one of the great disappointments of my mother's life, and she graduated high school, never went to college, was that she always wanted a home of her own, but we never, had the money to do that. She died young and never achieved that dream. But I think, my father died reasonably young as well. But What ended up happening is both of their sons were able to go to college, which was a pretty big deal.
How would you describe your parents?
Is wonderful people. My father, I think, because of his financial background, of having come to this country without any money, of living through the Great Depression, was very worried about not having a job. My mother was more ambitious, being born in America, wanted more, and there was, to be honest with you, a lot of tension in our household, and it's something that I've never forgotten. As I said before, my mother wanted her own home. It's not the biggest dream in the world, but it was to her. And my father was just nervous about it, spending money, because he was worried, what happens if you lose your job? So that tension over money was very significant. My father, so that was a very important part of my background, the fear about not having money, seeing other kids with more money. My mom, what can I say? They were very wonderful and good people. My father was a very gregarious guy. He loved America without ever talking about it all that much. But the fact that when you come from, when he came from Poland, that he became an American, that his kids were able to enjoy a quality of life that would have been unthinkable from that very small, poor town from which he came. He just, without talking about it, was just an extremely proud an American.
Did you apply those lessons and those experiences in raising your own family?
Well, I learned some things. If you ask my wife, she will tell you I'm also very, very tight with money. When I was elected mayor of the city of Burlington, I was living in a pretty small apartment. She forced me at that point to buy a home, and later on we got married. We bought another home. So I think I have inherited some of my parents' tightness with money.
How did you meet your wife?
Funny story. Jane was active in a neighborhood organization. It's called the King Street Youth Program, downtown Burlington. And they were obviously very concerned back in 1981 about the election for mayor that was coming up. So she went into the office along with other people, with the incumbent mayor, guy I ended up beating. And she started telling him, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? And the mayor said, you sound like this guy, Bernie Sanders. And she said, who is this Bernie Sanders? Well, we met during the campaign, and we went out. We were married in 1988.
There is a recording of you when you were serving as mayor, 1987. We're not
Please
going to
don't play it. Don't play it.
So you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, I know it.
This land is your land.
Among others, yes.
It's available online at berniebeat.com.
You're really going to sell this tape, huh?
Well, how did that come about?
It came about. We had a great band in Burlington. No, there was a guy, Todd Lockwood, who had a studio, a music studio, not far away actually from where Jane was living. And he said, look, I'm going to put together a band, that we have a band, come on down and do some recordings. And I remember it was a lot of fun. It was really nice to see how an album is put together. But needless to say, people should not vote for me for president based on my singing capabilities. Not when I'm running for office. I'm not going to get out my guitar and sing some songs. Ain't going to happen.
Let's talk policy. The role of the federal government is what?
In a civilized democratic society, the role of the federal government, in my view, is to represent the needs of the vast majority of the people and to do everything that we can to make sure that all of our people have a decent standard of living and a decent quality of life. And I got to say this, Steve. One of the points that I've been making in this campaign is that many people are not fully appreciative of how far we are behind many other countries in protecting the rights and the standard of living of ordinary Americans. For example, I don't know how many people know, there is one major country on earth that does not guarantee health care to all people as a right. That country is the United States of America. And we now have 35 million Americans without any health insurance, and even more who are underinsured. That's wrong. Healthcare should be a right. We should learn. I live 100 miles away from Canada. They do it. UK does it. Germany does it. Scandinavia does it. Healthcare should be right. Give you other examples. In America right now, if you don't have a lot of money, you're a working class woman and you have a baby, you have no guarantee that you're going to be paid to be able to stay home and take care of your baby. That is an outrage. Every other major country provides women with that right. And I'm going to fight for that right. And not only moms, but dads as well have a right to get to know their baby. Paid sick leave, guaranteed vacation time. Our people today, because of the collapse of the American middle class and wages in America, our people working the longest hours of any people of any major country. Longest hours. We have no paid vacation time. Many of the new jobs out there offer people 1 week, 0 weeks. I want to see people have paid vacation time. I want to see us learn from other countries and make sure that college is affordable for all people. It is beyond stupidity to say to hundreds of thousands of kids who have so much to offer our country, oh, your family doesn't have a lot of money, you can't afford to go to college. Oh, you've come out of college $60,000, $100,000 in debt, you're going to have to spend the rest of your life paying off that debt at 8%, 9% interest rates. That is crazy stuff. It is counterproductive for what America should be.
In fact, I've read that you have taken bus trips with many of your constituents to Canada. Why is it so much more expensive here in the U.S. than just across the border?
Great country. Great question. Now, let me just tell you that, because sometimes, events happen and you just don't forget them, and this was one. I was the first member of the U.S. House to take people across the Canadian border, and the people were from northern Vermont. We took a busload of people. They were mostly women, working class women who were dealing with breast cancer, and some of them were using a drug called tamoxifen. And I'll never forget this. We went across the border. We had arranged for all of this. Went into a pharmacy in Montreal. Women were buying that particular drug for 10% of the price that they were paying in the United States of America.
Why?
And tears were coming out of their eyes when they paid for that. Because the pharmaceutical industry in this country is one of the most powerful lobbying forces. Very wealthy, very powerful. Every other major country, including Canada and throughout Europe, negotiates drug prices because they have national healthcare systems. So they're not going to pay top-of-the-line prices. And in this country right now, because of the power of the pharmaceutical industry, you walk into a drugstore tomorrow to get your medicine, price could be double what it is today. There are no regulations. They can charge you any price they want, and they do. And now it's not only brand name drugs, they're moving aggressively in terms of generic drugs, which are also skyrocketing. So the bottom line is the pharmaceutical industry can do anything it wants, and it is a horrific situation because I talk to doctors who work in working class communities. They say 25% of their patients cannot afford to fill the prescriptions that the doctors are writing. What sense is that? So that is an issue I've been on for a long time. We have got to regulate the pharmaceutical industry. They cannot continue to charge us the highest prices in the world.
As you well know, though, your critics say you're espousing socialism and you're a socialist. How do you respond?
Well, the answer is I am a democratic socialist, and I think we have a lot to learn from countries like Denmark and Norway and Sweden and Finland and many of the European countries who have done a much better job than we have in terms of income and wealth inequality, guaranteeing health care to all of their people. If you go to Denmark today, or you go to Finland, do you know how much college costs? Zero. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, in Finland, they actually pay you to go to college. Should I apologize for that? I think that's a good idea. I think we want to make sure that every kid in this country is able to get an education regardless of the income of their families. Our child care system in this country for working families, a total embarrassment. Many families just cannot find affordable quality child care in what are the most important years of a human being's life, 0 to 4. So I think what we need is a government which taps the innovation that is so strong in America. We are a very entrepreneurial society. Every day somebody's come up with a great product, creating wealth. That is a good thing. But when you have a situation where the top 0.1% owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%, Steve, when today 99% of all new income is going to the top 1%, when one family, the Waltons, own more wealth than the bottom 40% of the American people, that is not an economy that works for the people of this country. It's not sustainable, it's not moral, and we've got to make some fundamental changes in the way we do economics in this country.
But how do you do that and also have a free enterprise system that does create the private sector jobs and the innovation and the entrepreneurship that is known in this country?
The way to do that, and that's a very good question, is to say, go out, innovate, create new products, create wealth. We want you to do that. But at the same time, you can't have all of it. You can't have all of the wealth that's coming and being created in this country. You have to be part of America. And what I say to the billionaire class is their greed. We appreciate their innovations, but their greed is destroying America. They cannot have it all. So I think, you look at countries around the world, we're not the only innovative countries, but you need a tax system which is fair. When you have major corporations in this country who are stashing virtually, tens of billions of dollars in profits in the Cayman Islands and other tax havens, that's wrong. They've got to start paying their fair share of taxes. Warren Buffett, one of the richest guys in the world, reminds us that his effective tax rate is lower than his private secretary's. That's also wrong. So you got to say to the wealthiest people in this country, sorry, if you want to enjoy America, you have to accept your responsibilities, and your responsibilities is paying your fair share of taxes so that our kids can go to college, so that we can have a strong child care system, so that we can rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, which is an international embarrassment, and create the millions of jobs we need.
You told John Harwood of CNBC that you'd advocate a 90% tax rate. Now, is that a reality, or is that more of a policy
statement? I did not say
statement?
that. I mean, I've been asked that. That's been around the internet. No, we have not. We're working on a comprehensive tax proposal. So that's not quite accurate. But what we have done is introduced a number of pieces of legislation already, and we will deal with it with a comprehensive program which deals with individual tax rates. We haven't done it yet. But here's what I want. We are going to eliminate these incredible loopholes that allow corporations to stash their money in tax havens, and we're losing about $100 billion a year on that. We are going to ask for a transaction tax on Wall Street speculation. We can raise a lot of revenue doing that. We are going to put forward a progressive estate tax. Unbelievably, at a time when the rich are getting much richer and everybody else is getting poorer, my Republican colleagues have decided that we should eliminate the estate tax and give a $200 billion plus tax break over 10 years to the top 0.2%. Unbelievable. And what we're going to do is, instead of doing that, we're going to come up with a progressive estate tax that does ask that when the billionaire class to pay their fair share of taxes.
If you're elected president, you likely, though, will have at least a Republican-controlled House, possibly a Republican-controlled Senate. So how do you get things done?
All right, that's a great question. And this is what I say in every speech that I give. And I'm the only candidate for president probably who's ever said this. And that is to say, look, no person, no matter who he or she may be as president, can address the enormous problems facing the middle class and working families of this country unless there is a political revolution, in the sense that we develop a strong grassroots political movement which not only elects somebody to be president, but maintains their energy in demanding that Congress represent all of the people rather than a handful of campaign contributors. One of the very interesting points is very often people say, well, Bernie Sanders, you're way out of touch, you're a fringe guy, you're really radical. And yet if you look at the issues that I talk about, guess what? Vast majority of the people support the issues that I talk about. Just a poll in the Wall Street Journal the other day, overwhelming support for expanding Social Security by lifting the cap on taxable income. Republicans want to cut Social Security. I want to expand it. Strong support for raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. That is my view. Many Republicans want to even eliminate the concept of Social Security. Strong support for asking the wealthy and large corporations to start paying their fair share of taxes. Republicans want to lower taxes on the rich. So the interesting point is, what you have right here with the Republican Congress is these guys, in my view, are way out of touch with where the American people are coming from. And my job is to rally the American people, working with people all over this country to create a strong political movement so that Congress starts listening to them. When that happens, we will be able to get a progressive agenda through. If it doesn't, if, as in the last election, 63% of the people don't vote, forget it. The billionaire class and the campaign contributors on Wall Street will continue to prevail.
Has President Obama met your expectations?
Yes and no. I personally like President Obama very much. There are a number of issues, obviously. And I should also say, Steve, that I think history will judge him a lot kinder than his contemporaries do. Look, when this guy came into office, we were losing 800,000 jobs a month. and the financial system of the world was on the verge of collapse. No one denies that we're in much better shape today. Where I have disagreed with him, as I was on the floor of the Senate for 8.5 hours on the first filibuster in recent history, was to say, do not continue Bush's tax breaks for the rich. Obviously, I also strongly disagree with him on this Trans-Pacific Partnership, which I believe is a continuation of disastrous trade policies, and I have disagreed with him on a number of other issues. But do I like him? Do I think he is trying hard to protect working families? I do. Has he gone as far as I would have liked him to go? No. But here is where I believe he has made a very big mistake, and that is after running a brilliant campaign in 2008, which really mobilized people, excited people, he essentially said to his grassroots movement, thank you for electing me, but I'll take it from here. I'm on my own. I'll sit down with John Boehner. I'll sit down with Mitch McConnell. We'll negotiate something fair. First of all, the Republicans never intended to have serious negotiations, but second of all, he lost his clout when he essentially pushed aside the people who elected him. And I will not make that mistake. We're going to keep that movement alive and vital and forceful. That's the way we bring about change in America.
What do you think of Speaker Boehner?
Well, I knew John when we were in the House together. Not very well, but I knew him. You know, I think he is a traditional center-right leader who has whose views are obviously different than mine on virtually every major issue. I mean, I think he has a difficult job keeping his conservative folks in line with his extreme right-wing people. He has a difficult job.
And yet, while you differ on the issues, you've had some praise for former Speaker Newt Gingrich.
Well, I think and obviously Newt Gingrich and I disagree on everything. But what I respected about Gingrich when he took office, was it 94, was he was a pretty bold guy. He laid out his so-called contract for America. I disagreed with every element of it. I campaigned against it. But he laid out a bold right-wing agenda. And I think, an agenda which represented the wealthiest people and the most powerful people. I think it's time that we had a bold, progressive agenda that speaks to the needs of working families in this country, many of whom are working longer hours for lower wages, many of them who are falling further and further behind. And I think we need an agenda that says, we are going to create decent paying jobs in this country. We are going to raise the minimum wage to a living wage. We are going to make sure that your kids can afford to go to college and you have decent child care. And by the way, we are going to overturn this disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision, which has done so much harm to this country in allowing billionaires to be able to buy elections.
Not only bold and progressive, but we covered an event in Denver, a huge crowd at the University of Denver, and you said we need to think big and that the challenges facing this country are more profound since the Great Depression. Can you elaborate
Sure.
on that?
Look, the middle class of this country has been disappearing for 40 years. And I want people to think about this. We have seen, as everybody knows, an explosion in technology, right? We all know that. We have seen a huge increase in worker productivity. If that is the reality, how does it happen that millions of people are working longer hours for low wages? I was in Iowa recently, and somebody that works with a church was telling me that 90% of the people who walk into the emergency food shelters are working people whose wages do not allow them to adequately feed their families. We have 45 million people living in poverty, and we have a grotesque level of income and wealth inequality, worse than any time since 1928. So you have an economy today that is failing the middle class. The rich are becoming obscenely richer. You have real unemployment at 11%, youth unemployment at over 30%. You have a campaign finance system right now in which billionaires are able to buy elections. If you wanted to run for president, you said to the Koch brothers, hey guys, I'm with you. And they would say, okay, Steve, we're prepared to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to get you elected. You work for us. Does anybody really believe that's what American democracy should be about? And that's where we are today. And then on top of all of that, as the Pope recently reminded us, we have a global crisis in terms of climate change. And what the scientists are telling us is that if we don't get our act together, we don't transform our energy system away from fossil fuel into energy efficiency and sustainable energy, the planet that we are going to leave our children and our grandchildren will be significantly less habitable than the one today. I mean, we saw recently what's going on in Karachi. I mean, and That speaks to what this future of this planet is about if we don't transform our energy system. So you add all that stuff together. Rich getting richer, billionaires able to buy elections, climate change not being sufficiently dealt with, the collapse of the American middle class, yeah, I think it's fair to say we have more problems today than any time since.
What did you think of Pope Francis' encyclical?
I got to tell you, I love this guy. I think what he has done is so extraordinary. People think, I am radical on economics. Read what he says. And what he says is not just that we have to pay attention to the dispossessed, is what he calls them, to the young children in America and all over the world who don't have any jobs, to the 17 to 20 year. Today, African American youth unemployment, you know what it is? 51% for kids who have graduated high school. This is true all over the world. He says, pay attention to those. He also says, and this is unbelievable, he says, we have made money the golden idol. We worship money. You become a billionaire, you're a big hero. You're a sports star making hundreds of millions of dollars. Oh, you're a great hero. But you're a teacher making $30,000 or $40,000. Who are you? You're not significant. You're an old person living alone. Can't afford to buy the food you need or the medicine you need. We don't have to pay attention to you. So I think he has been just an extraordinary leader, one of the great religious leaders in recent history, speaking out on issues that are not discussed enough. So count me as a very strong supporter of Pope Francis.
Do you think he will be a transformational figure in history?
Yes, I do. I mean, he came along at exactly the time we needed that voice. And not only speaking about income and wealth inequality, that's huge, but just talking about what kind of culture are we where we worship money, where you tell kids the golden life is just make as much money as you possibly can. You don't have to worry about your neighbors. You don't have to worry about the environment. Greed is good. And he is spending so much of his time saying, no, greed is not good. Caring about your fellow human beings is good. It is what life is supposed to be about. So, I mean, I am just a huge fan of him. We post on our website, sanders.senate.gov, very often we post many of the things that he's talking about.
Would you consider yourself middle class? What is your own personal wealth status?
Today? Well, we started off when I was a kid, lower middle class. I would say, I don't know, upper middle class today. Sure. I get a congressional salary. That's pretty good.
Do you own stocks, mutual funds?
Nope, I never did. We once, it's funny, we dealt with IBM and I owned $500 in IBM stock. That was my entire stock holdings. I don't think I own them anymore, so I think I have no stocks at all.
Campaigns are about choices and differences. So on the policy issues, where do you differ with your opponents, Martin O'Malley and Hillary Clinton?
Let me talk about Hillary Clinton for a moment. First of all, I've known Hillary Clinton for 25 years. I served with her for a while in the Senate. And I like Hillary Clinton, and I respect Hillary Clinton. This is one very, very intelligent woman who has a very strong career of public service. So you're not going to hear me making personal attacks about Hillary Clinton. But we do have differences of opinion. Let me give you a few examples. Not only did I vote, based on the information that I received, not only did I vote against the war in Iraq, I was one of the leaders in opposition to that war. And I just recently saw on YouTube a speech that I gave, which really sent shudders down me because a lot of what I feared would happen did in fact happen. Secretary Clinton obviously voted for the war. I believe that climate change, as I mentioned a moment ago, is one of the great global crises that we faced. It made no sense to me that we should extract and transport some of the dirtiest fuel, fossil fuel in this country, oil from Alberta, in terms of the Keystone pipeline. I vigorously opposed the Keystone pipeline. Secretary Clinton hasn't had an opinion on that. I believe that our trade policies, NAFTA, CAFTA, permanent normal trade relations with China, have resulted in the loss of millions of decent-paying jobs in this country as companies shut down here and move to low-wage countries. I helped lead the opposition to the TPP. Will continue to be in opposition to it. Hillary Clinton has essentially not voiced an opinion on that. While everybody agrees that terrorism is a very serious threat to the United States of America, and we've got to do everything we can to protect our people, I thought the USA Patriot Act went too far in attacking our constitutional rights and our privacy rights. I voted against it. Secretary Clinton, when she was in the Senate, as I understand it, voted for it. But the bottom line, I think, of all of those things is that right now, above and beyond all of that, we need leadership which says to the billionaire class, the people who now have the wealth and the power, that you just cannot have it all, that our country and our government belong to all of the people and not just a few. I have spent my entire political life, from mayor of Burlington, to member of the House, to United States Senator, in opposition to every special interest that you can imagine. People will have to judge what Secretary Clinton's position is on that.
There will be differences in how you fund your campaign and she and others fund their campaigns.
Big differences. One of the hesitances that I had, Steve, in deciding to run is, could we run a campaign taking on people who have incredible sums of money who are setting up super PACs? And when you talk about Citizens United, you're talking about these outrageous super PACs by which billionaires can put as much money as they want, often without any disclosure whatsoever. And in fact, there will be campaigns being run where the super PACs will spend more money than the contributions coming into the individual candidates. And that is just, to me, awful and undermining of American democracy. I don't have a super PAC. I'm not going to support any super PAC. And I was just wondering, could we raise enough money through small individual contributions, not to outspend our opponents, we can't do that, but to run a strong and credible campaign. It turns out that we have now had, roughly speaking, about 200,000 Americans going to BernieSanders.com who are prepared to make modest contributions. Our contributions are average less than $40 a piece. I mean, that's really incredible. So I'm going to be heavily outspent. But the good news, at least for me, is we are going to have enough money to run a credible campaign and a winning campaign.
So are you taking lessons from your campaign for a Burlington mayor across the country?
Absolutely. And the lesson that I learned as mayor of Burlington is the way you win elections is you bring people together. So you bring, people in the union movement together with people in the environmental movement. Will they have differences of opinion? Yeah. But on most of the major issues, they will be in agreement. They're fighting for the middle class and for working families. You bring people in the women's movement. You bring people in the gay movement. You bring people in the African American community, in the Hispanic community, in the Asian community. You bring people together around a common agenda that says, okay, we may disagree on this or that issue, but let's not get divided up. That's what Republicans like to do. They like to get people divided up. I like to bring people together. That's what I did as mayor. We call this coalition politics. Yeah, we're going to disagree on this or that issue, but we're going to stand together to fight for a growing middle class rather than a shrinking middle class, and fight for a government which is not beholden to large and wealthy campaign contributors, but to the needs of ordinary Americans. And by the way, we're also going to focus a lot on young people, because I think there's so much idealism and energy among the young people of this country, and especially around issues of women's rights and climate change. We're going to try to tap into that as much as we can.
Let me read a quote. This is from National Journal, one of your supporters in Iowa. His name is John Murphy. He said that Bernie Sanders is going to bring up some of the issues that Hillary Clinton may not want to talk about.
Absolutely. There's no ifs and buts about that. I mean, it's one thing to talk in generalities about this or that issue. We have been as specific as we can. We have mapped out very specific legislation as to how we're going to make every public college and university in this country tuition free, and we're going to do it by a tax on Wall Street. That's very specific. I have introduced legislation that would call for a fee on carbon so that we can transform our energy system and deal with climate change. We have introduced legislation to guarantee health care to all of our people as a right. So, I think on issue, I've been introduced legislation to overturn Citizens United Supreme Court decision. So I don't talk about vague ideas or general ideas. We have been pretty specific on some of the most important issues facing the American people, and that's what this campaign is going to be about.
You've had huge crowds. Poll numbers look promising in Iowa and New Hampshire. Has it surprised you?
Yeah. I mean, I thought from day one that we had a shot to win this. I thought from day one that the inside the Beltway mentality that you see so much in media here and in Congress is way, way, way removed from the reality of people's lives. People out there are hurting. They don't understand why 99% of all new income is going to the top 1%. They desperately want a government that they can respect, feel part of, a government that represents their interest. That's what I knew from day one. But I did not know, I would not have told you a few months ago, that the campaign would be catching on as fast as it has.
If you have to pick a running mate, if you have to select a cabinet.
Are you looking for another job? Is it not?
But what kind of person would you be looking for? And if you want to name names, you can, but what type of people would you surround yourself with?
Well, let me say this. In all due respect to recent presidents, from President Obama to President Bush, to President Clinton, to President Bush 1, I will not surround myself with people who come from Wall Street and corporate America. There are brilliant people out there in all walks of life who have spent a lot of their life fighting for the needs of working families, fighting for minority rights, and those are the people that I will be turning to. I think it's a little bit premature to be talking about. It's like, I think we are doing well, and I think the polls, I'm not a great fan of polls, and we'll see what happens, but feeling good about the election. A little bit premature to be talking about running mates.
You are 73 years old. How's your health?
This is wood. So thank God I've been blessed, and I feel very fortunate about that. I can't remember the last time I took a day off from being sick. I just am, I get nervous about saying this because probably tomorrow I'll come down with something awful. But thank God my health has been very, very strong. When I was a kid, I was a long-distance runner. I used to run cross-country and run a pretty good miler. So I was blessed with a lot of endurance. If you follow my schedule, I work pretty hard and I have a lot of energy.
Where did you go to college?
I went to Brooklyn College for 1 year, and then I went to the University of Chicago.
When you came to the House, one of your first pieces of legislation was a national cancer registry. Right. Why did that become your first major bill, and what has it meant over the last 20 plus years?
It was a very significant piece of legislation. And here's what, I am a great believer in epidemiology. And that is what we want to ascertain is what are the factors that will give people in one country, which result in people in one country coming down with more types of disease than people in another country? Why do farmers who may be handling chemicals or fertilizers come down with a higher rate of cancer or other illnesses than somebody working in an office? Why do people in the Northeast perhaps come down with problems that people in the Southwest will not have? There's a lot to be learned about environmental factors and other factors in terms of the causation, not just of cancer, but of disease in general. So if you look at the international information, you find that rates of breast cancer fluctuate significantly all over the world. Why is that? What can we learn? So that was why I did that.
What did you learn?
I learned that that there are reasons. I mean, we're still studying it. I'm not a scientist, but that there are reasons why certain people in certain parts of the world come down with illness rather than other people. And I think that chemicals and environmental exposures have an impact.
Clearly, you've been part of the debate here in Congress. Do you think you've made a difference?
Yeah, I do. And I'll tell you how I think we make a difference. I've been so pleased to see recently, that in a time when Republican presidential candidates are talking about cutting Social Security, when George Bush wanted to privatize Social Security, now the debate and what the American people strongly support is a significant expansion of Social Security benefits. At a time when the discussion was, well, how much more in tax breaks do we give to the rich? Well, now the discussion is, in what way do we demand that the wealthy and large corporations start paying their fair share of college? The idea of making college, public colleges and universities free is an idea that is catching on. The idea of investing in primary health care so people can get to a doctor when they need is something that I've been pushing for many, many years, raising consciousness on the crisis of dental care, taking care of our veterans. I was chairman of the Veterans Senate Committee for 2 years. I'm proud of what we've accomplished, but consciousness on the serious problems that continue to plague our veterans who came home from Iraq and Afghanistan. I think there's growing consciousness on that as well.
Are there people along the way that helped shape your views or formed your opinions? And if so, who?
Well, I work very closely, and again, this is a little bit unusual. If you look at the people who are around me on my campaign, we're a pretty tight group of people who work with me for 20 or 30 years. With one exception, Tad Devine, who is a media consultant, who has helped me and is helping me now, doing a great job with me now. We've not reached out to media-type consultants. So my group of my think tank, so to speak, is of progressive people who know me very well and who I've worked with for many years.
So if voters are in a voting booth and have to decide between you and somebody else, make your pitch. Why should they elect Bernie Sanders?
I think the answer is these are very, very tough times and unusual times for this country. We have a handful of people, a billionaire class, and I use that word advisedly, which has unbelievable wealth and unbelievable power. And unless we have the courage, and I understand this is not easy, and frankly, I understand that people are even uncomfortable about talking about it, but unless we have the courage to take them on and create a government which works for the middle class and working families, not just wealthy campaign contributors, the future for our kids and our grandchildren is not going to be a good one. And I know this is a tough fight, and I talk about the need for political revolution, to get people involved in politics in a way they never have before. But unless we do that, I worry about not only climate change, I worry about elections in which politicians are simply bought and sold by billionaires, and I worry about whether or not this middle class will ever grow, or whether it will continue to shrink as it has for 40 years.
But they would say the U.S. is not Denmark. We're a very different country. How do you respond?
No, we are not Denmark. That is a small, homogeneous country. But I think we can learn, if we are smart. You know, when I was a mayor, what we established was a best practices policy. In other words, you look at what cities all over the country are doing. You steal good ideas from Oregon, from Virginia. Anybody who has a good idea, you steal it. We should be prepared to be as open-minded as we can and say, you know what? Hey, in Germany, they provide college to their kids with free tuition. Is that a good idea or not? I think it's a great idea. In Denmark, they have a very good healthcare system, which is much more cost-effective than ours, providing healthcare as a right to all their people. Is that a good idea? I think it is. In Finland, they have a very strong educational system and a very good child care system. What do we learn from that? So I think we do some things very, very well in our country that we should be proud of. People steal our ideas. But we should be open-minded and take the best ideas that are working in countries around the world that protect the middle class and working families of those countries.
A couple of final points. I want to go back to infrastructure because you brought that up.
Right.
Roads, bridges, rails,
Yes.
airports. Why have they become, why are they in such disrepair?
Oh my God. A very simple answer is we don't invest in them. And this is one of the saddest things that I can imagine. And it is that what was historically a bipartisan no-brainer, you have to invest in your roads, your bridges, your water systems, your rail, your levees, your dams. Republicans don't want to spend money. That's all. They want to protect the wealthy, not ask the wealthy to pay anything more in taxes. And if you're not raising money, you can't spend money. That's the simple truth. It sounds partisan. That is the simple truth. Hopefully, by the way, and I'm on that committee, we have passed a highway bill where Jim Inhofe, one of the more conservative members of Congress, of the Senate, worked with Barbara Boxer, one of the more progressive members, to come up with a step forward. Doesn't go anywhere near as far as we should go. In my view, and I have introduced legislation to do this, we should invest $1 trillion in rebuilding our infrastructure in the next 5 years. And when we do that, we make huge progress, but we also create up to 13 million jobs, something we desperately need.
If there was a Sanders doctrine with regard to American foreign policy, what would it be?
Look, the world is a crazy place today. It is a dangerous place. It is a very complicated place. And I think it's impossible for me to give you a 30-second answer of what we do. But this is what I do think. I voted against the war in Iraq. I think history will call that as the right vote. And what we have got to understand is that when you go to war, very often you have unintended consequences. You heard, I heard, people like Vice President Cheney, Don Rumsfeld, President Bush saying, hey, we're going to go in, we're going to overthrow Saddam Hussein, our troops will be back 6 months later, we'll establish democracy in the Middle East. Isn't that a wonderful thing? Yeah, it's a wonderful thing. But many of us understood that in the real world that was not going to happen. There were unintended consequences. We are suffering those unintended consequences today. So I think, number one, We have got to understand that war has these consequences. Be very, very, very careful before you commit our troops into harm's way. Number two, you can't do it alone. You need an international coalition. The United States, I do not want to see the United States in perpetual warfare in the Middle East. We've got to work with the world. We've got to take on ISIS. But the countries in the region themselves, the Muslim countries, have got to lead that effort with our support.
Who do you think has been America's most consequential presidents?
I would say Franklin Delano Roosevelt for a couple of reasons. Obviously, he came to office in '32 in the midst of the worst economic collapse in American history, the Great Depression. And he developed programs which put people back to work and gave confidence to the American people that the government was listening to their pain. And that was almost as important as the programs that he created that created millions of jobs. But the second thing that he did, which was really extraordinary, he said in 1936 in his re-election, he said, you know what, in so many words, what he called the economic royalists, that's the term he used in the 30s, I use the term billionaire class today. He says, you know what, these economic royalists, they hate my guts, and I welcome their hatred. I'm not afraid of them. I welcome their hatred because I'm going to stand with the working people of this country who are in so much pain today, and I'm going to take these guys on. And I thought that was an act of extraordinary courage, something we have seen very, very rarely in American history.
Can we get there again?
Yes. I am enormously confident in the future of this country if we have the political will. And what I say to people, we are the wealthiest country in the history of the world. That's where we are. Unbelievable technology. I don't accept the fact that all of our kids who have the ability and the qualifications can't go to college. I don't accept the fact that we can't have the best child care system in the world. I don't accept the fact that we can't have a healthcare system of high quality, cost effective, that guarantees health care to all people. You know, funny story, not so funny. 100 years ago, workers took to the streets in large demonstrations. And you know what they said? They said, we're not beasts of burden, we're not animals. We want a 40-hour work week. Remember reading about that? A 40-hour work week. Today, over 80% of male workers are working longer than 40 hours. Over 60% of women workers are working more than 40 hours. People are working 2 or 3 jobs. Can we create an economy that works for the middle class? I believe that we can. I'm absolutely confident that we can. But we can't do it unless we take on the greed of a handful of people who want it all.
And finally, as you well know, your friends Ben and Jerry, Ben and Jerry's Ice Cream, creating Bernie's Rebellion. So if you were going to create this ice cream, what would the ingredients be?
Chocolate chip, and some tart cherries, and some ingredients which give you a real bounce and some real energy, because we need that energy today.
Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, Democratic presidential candidate, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.